o'clock where we are, so we are live. And good morning, everyone. And welcome to those of you joining us online, and a special welcome to those of you joining us on site. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to Helsinki this morning, as Finland, together with the Åland Islands, holds the presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers for this year, 2025. My name is Michaela Lindeman, and I'll be happy to serve as a moderator for this event, which means we're going to spend 2 hours together now. This is a webinar called Nordic Alcohol Policies at a Crossroads, which pretty much gives a clear hint on what we will be discussing, because we'll explore the policies, we'll explore the politics surrounding alcohol regulation in the Nordic countries as of today. And in many aspects, we are experiencing quite rapid changes. And we will try to sort of analyze both the driving forces behind them, the processes, and also the possible outcomes during these 2 hours together. This is an event hosted by the Nordic Welfare Center, which is an institution under the Nordic Council of Ministers. And it's done in collaboration with POPNAD, which is the Nordic Welfare Center's platform dedicated to research, policy and development in the areas of alcohol and drugs and other related substances. I'm here today with my colleague Anna Raninen, which is Head of Communications at the Nordic Welfare Center. And Anna has a special task today because she will take care of the Q&A function throughout this whole webinar, which is found in the Teams platforms. Because during the whole event, but perhaps especially during the first round of presentations, you are encouraged to pose questions through the Q&A function, and we will try to address them, as many as we can. Right, but we have 2 hours together today. The program begins with a number of presentations, after which we will move on to a roundtable discussion. But I think we can just get started. And the first presentation of the day will be given by Maria Neufeld, who is a technical officer at the WHO Regional Office for Europe. And Maria will introduce us to a recently launched report about the Nordic alcohol monopolies. There you have it. So welcome, Maria. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation, and it's a great pleasure and honor being part of that. I apologize for not being able to be there with you in Helsinki. I'm connecting from our office in Copenhagen in Denmark. And can you, yeah, perfect. We're seeing the slides. I want to say a few words about the recently launched publication, and thank you so much for all your contributions and the great collaboration on that. And basically, I want to say a few words how we as WHO are viewing the Nordic alcohol monopolies, because personally, I think this is really the perfect one-stop shop for all the WHO recommendations that you have in one place and that you can implement quite easily. And I know I'm speaking to quite a knowledgeable audience today, but I just, instead of an introduction, the next slide, please, I just want to remind everyone that whenever we talk about alcohol, we really talk about a very potent and harmful substance if it's not regulated well. So just a reminder, whenever we talk about alcohol, we also need to talk about how alcohol really impacts a lot of SDG, Sustainable Development Goals. So we're not talking about health. Health is very important. It's the third SDG here. But we have to also always think that it is a lot about the fact that alcohol is increasing inequalities. It's a lot about, the harm that alcohol causes to others, not just those who consume it, in the form of violence, in the form of road traffic, accidents, injuries, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. It is an obstacle to socioeconomic productivity. It has impact on our climate, our environment, and so forth. And we did a publication on that, and I can also highly recommend the publication that Movendi International did. That they did a really great job of spelling out all those SDGs and how alcohol essentially affects the entire 2030 agenda in terms of the economic, the social, and environmental dimension. So having said that, let's move on to the next slide, and let's look closer at the third target, at health. And here, I think it's also really important to always remind ourselves that whenever we talk about alcohol, it's not just the dimension of alcohol use disorders. Of course, it is an important part of that, but we're talking about really, really a broad variety of different health outcomes. So we have to remind ourselves that a large proportion of death from the most common diseases and conditions like cancers, like cardiovascular diseases, like injuries, are actually caused by alcohol. And if you click next, yes, and here, just a few examples. So here on this slide, you see the latest data from WHO published in our global report from last year. And again, this is not Europe. This is not, like Finland specific. We're talking about the world here. So 23% of road injuries would not exist if alcohol was not there. Almost 20% of esophagus cancers are caused by alcohol. 12% of colorectal cancers are caused by alcohol. By the way, it's Colorectal Awareness Month, so it's really important to talk about the topic. For cardiovascular diseases, we have, for example, 8% of death caused by hemorrhagic stroke that would not exist without alcohol. So we really need always to remind ourselves, also when we're talking, to health professionals, to health ministries, and so forth about that. So, and this is why, next slide, WHO has developed all those resources to identify interventions that would reduce this immense harm that comes from alcohol and from other risk factors, such as tobacco, such as lack of physical activity, nutrition, and so forth. And here are the key resources of that. They deal, and I'm sure you're all familiar with that, with this concept of the best buys, meaning that those are the most cost-effective interventions to reduce alcohol consumption or any other risk factors and prevent or delay death. Next slide, please. And for alcohol, we have those three really key things. Those are the really key interventions that will reduce alcohol consumption and reduce harms. And those are the interventions that provide the highest health impact for the least amount of resources invested. And this is, I'm sure you all know that, but just as a reminder, increase taxes, reduce or actually ban advertising of alcohol because a substance so harmful should not be advertised, and then reduce physical availability of alcohol via reduced hours of sales or sale locations and so forth. Next slide, please. And also, as a reminder, these are quite old data. We're working on an update of that. But just as a reminder, those three best buys, those three very cost-effective things, they actually tend also to be the least implemented in Europe. Here, the picture does not look too bad because it's for the entire WHO European region, as you see on the map. So we have also quite a lot of Central Asian countries here where alcohol is better regulated than in the EU. If we would look only at the EU, the picture looks quite grim. However, there is a huge difference, as all of you know, between the Nordic monopoly countries and the EU. Next slide, please. So having those three best buys in mind, when we look at the Nordic monopolies or countries with or territories with Nordic monopolies, we immediately see that the Nordic monopolies are so aligned with those three best buys, or they're the mechanism through which those three buys can be implemented in a relatively straightforward manner, if you ask me. Because when we look, for example, at availability, well, you have a certain number of stores and they have very clear hours of sales, and there is it's really clear how they operate, and they enforce, for example, minimum minimum purchasing age limits in a very clear manner. So if you read the report that I just mentioned, we have comparisons there showing that age verifications procedures are carried out in a much more comprehensive way in monopoly stores as compared to, I don't know, supermarkets in other countries. If you think about marketing, for example, it's very clear that in monopoly stores, you don't have what we call point of sale marketing. You don't advertise alcohol in your stores. You don't advertise this on your websites or through other communication channels. And this is not the case in many other countries. So with that, you already have quite a good hold of the second best buy. And then thirdly, when thinking about alcohol taxes, well, it's not as straightforward because, of course, the monopolies are not the ones who are like deciding about taxes and setting the taxes, but because monopolies are integrated into national alcohol strategies, and they're part of this entire way of the entire solution of how alcohol is regulated, those countries also have very strong, I mean, if you compare it to the rest of the EU, very strong frameworks within which you have quite high taxes. And also what is quite important that you don't have promotional pricing or any kind of other schemes in the retail stores of the monopoly. So you will not see below cost sales or promotional price promotions, or I don't know, buy two, get third bottle free kind of stuff that we're seeing in other countries. And this is really, really important. And here I'm just speaking of taxes, I just it's not from this specific report. It's from another publication that I put here in the source as a reference. It's a comparison of all the countries in our region. Here on the right hand side, you see a ranking of what we call a tax share among countries. So the tax share is the proportion of the price that is made up by tax in a country. So for example, I don't know, if I buy an alcohol beverage, how much percent of this is actually going to tax, is going in the form of tax to the government for, I don't know, whatever the government will do with that, versus the rest that is, I don't know, kept by the producer, retailer, whoever. And we see that all the Nordic monopoly countries, there is a very high proportion of tax from the final retail price that goes to the government in the form of revenue, which is good, which is great, I think. And there I found it quite interesting. If you look, for example, at Denmark, just as a comparator, because it's the only country, the only Nordic country without an alcohol monopoly, it's quite on the bottom of the list, if you want to say it like that. So I found this quite an interesting finding, and I think it's quite telling. Next slide, please. So just to summarize the idea, I think when you think about the WTO best buys, if you want to implement them, let's say you want to reduce the burden of alcohol harm of, this second slide that I was showing you, then actually the WTO monopolies are your solution. They're a one-stop shop for that, because like you have all these three key principles there, plus you have so much more. And I think for outsiders like me who are not from a Nordic country, this is such an interesting thing if you think about that, how much, like, all those different aspects, and we don't really have time to go into them, but I just want to bring one example and just say a few key principles that I think make monopolies stand out. First of all, it's a key principle that this profit-making interest or motive is removed from selling a substance that is causing so much harm. So by that, immediately eliminate, like this basic economic driver to sell more of this product, to advertise more, and so forth. So with that, you have quite a comprehensive, again, framework to deal with alcohol consumption and its consequences at the population level. And the fact that the Nordic monopolies are really integrated into national alcohol strategies, I think this is something that is very, well, very precious, because we have examples of other monopolies where this historically has not been the case, and where those kind of arrangements have actually caused harm. So I think the Nordic monopolies really stand out in terms of their mandate, their function, what they're doing. And just an example here, which I personally find very interesting, it's the example of youth protection. Because when you think about the Nordic monopoly countries, you have this combination of a high minimum legal purchasing age or drinking age. That is, if you compare it to other EU countries, one of the highest. You have strict age verification procedures, as I mentioned, and you also have, this clear mandate of the monopolies to protect youth from harm, and to inform also the population of what alcohol is as a substance and the kind of harm it's causing. And we really, really see the result of it, I think. Next slide, please. When we, for example, look at how actually how adolescents behave in different countries in regards to alcohol consumption, and those are the 2019 ASPAT data. It's a pan-European study, a survey on substance use in adolescents. And here I think the data is really, really interesting, because if you look at that, so the gray bar that you have there, this is the average of all the European countries participating in the survey. And then you have the dark blue bar, Denmark. And then as a territory, you have separately the Faroe Islands, which is, has a monopoly. And then you have, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, the Nordic monopoly countries, or at least this is how we call them. And here you can very, very clearly see that all the Nordic monopoly countries are below the average, or are at the level of the European average. And Denmark really, really sticks out, because, as you know, Denmark has a very low purchasing age. When you're 16, you can go and you can buy beer and wine or whatever in supermarkets, and it does not have the monopoly. And as you have seen, the tax share is also lower. But just a caveat, really important caveat here, as you can see, it's 2019 data. New data will be released. Since then, Denmark really took action, has started implementing its new action plan to protect youth from alcohol and nicotine products. So, like, there's not everything is bad here. Next slide, please. And this is another illustration of why I think monopolies really work and how we will hear more about it from Ingeborg. But just to say, like, this is the type of data that you can find in the report, the type of comparisons that we made when we looked at, like how do Nordic monopoly countries, how do they behave in terms of other EU countries in terms of consumption. And on the upper part of the slide, you can see our key indicator of WHO, alcohol per capita consumption. In the dark blue bar in the middle, you can see this is the average for all EU countries, so EU 27, not the entire region. And you can clearly see that Nordic monopoly countries are on the right side of that. So that's great. What you can also see below is the proportion of alcohol attributable death among all death. So this is what I was showing you at the beginning, the proportion, the green bar that I was showing you at the beginning for the global data. This is basically spelled out for the EU. And here we again see that the Nordic monopoly countries are on the right side of the EU average, which is great. And here, the lesson learned is that, or here the key message, the punchline is that Nordic monopoly countries have lower drinking levels than most EU countries, and they also have lower rates of alcohol attributable harm. Well, maybe with the exception of Finland, that is closer to the EU average, but we can talk separately about that. That has a lot to do with the fact that if you compare, and again, you can, we have really nice overview tables of all the monopolies. I think that has to do a lot with the fact that when you compare the reach of the monopolies and how they function within countries, that in Finland, a lot of alcohol that is purchased, that is being consumed, is actually being consumed outside the monopoly. So in a way, you can say that, yeah, that the monopolies of other countries, they have a larger reach, a larger coverage of the population, thus larger protection effect. And I think also really clearly stands out is, for example, Norway. You know, I mean, of course, Norway is not part of the EU27, but for the sake of comparison, we put it there. Norway has the lowest consumption levels in the EU, let's say EU plus, and this really stands out. And I think that has a lot to do with, you know, what I just said about the Best Buys being the best, the one-stop shop. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is really just my final message, or my final thought that I want to communicate. Again, I'm sort of an outsider. I live in Denmark, but I'm not from Denmark, and I will not pretend that I really understand all the discussions that are happening right now. Apologies, in the Nordic countries in relation to the monopolies. But just as an outsider, I want to say that it's, how to say, it seems a bit weird to me that right now the countries where you have those amazing best policy solutions that we have in Euro, that you're discussing of, yeah, basically thinking of dismantling them or getting rid of them at the time when other countries are realizing this, the enormous harm that comes from alcohol, and are starting to regulate different parts. So the minimum unit price in Scotland, or the advertising restrictions in Ireland, or the cancer health warning in Ireland, or now we have also the availability restriction in Latvia, because they have, for example, they have allowed alcohol sales during COVID, and now they realized that that was not the real online sales of alcohol during COVID, and now they realized that this might not be a good idea. So those countries are now trying to, and there are more and more of countries that are really now trying to get bits and pieces of regulation done. And it's very, very difficult for them, because they don't have such a comprehensive framework of alcohol regulation like you do in Nordics. So it's just to say that it's a very interesting to see this kind of, yeah, contra-current development. And I think from that perspective, I really want to emphasize that the Nordic monopolies are very unique and very precious, and there are a lot of things that are done within these monopolies in terms of regulating and preventing harm that you cannot do otherwise, because otherwise it will be, you know, going for other pieces of regulation and legislation will be very complex, very costly, and it will be way less effective. So again, the Nordic monopolies are a one-stop shop for the double shop Best Buys. Next slide, please. And you can read all about that. We have the report, and we have the executive summary of that. So here you can download it with the QR code, and we'll also put the link to the resources into the chat. And with that, yeah, I want to again thank everyone who has contributed to this report. It's been a very interesting process of getting to know more about the monopolies. There are a lot of interest in those monopolies outside the Nordic countries. We have received a lot of interested requests from European countries. So I really want to talk more and encourage you more about, yeah, basically advertising the monopolies. I think it's a very, very interesting solution. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. That was a very, very thorough and very interesting presentation about the weight and the importance of the monopolies. So thank you very much for that. Next, we will get a short history lessons about the monopolies. We will have the second presentation of the day given by Ingeborg Rossow, who is a research professor at the Norwegian Institute for Public Health. And Ingeborg will provide us with a short sort of historical look into the Nordic monopolies and also insights into what evidence-based research can teach us about what works today. And we have a presentation by Ingeborg.
Good morning, everyone. First, thank you to the organizer for inviting me to present at this webinarium. It's an honor and a pleasure. I am sorry I could not come to Helsinki, not only because Helsinki is a wonderful city and that I also will miss the opportunity to meet good colleagues and friends in person, but I must also confess that I am still not comfortable with speaking to a camera instead of a live audience. Anyway, I've been asked to talk a bit about the historic background of the Nordic alcohol monopolies and what it is that the research evidence for their effectiveness to curb alcohol consumption and prevent alcohol-related harms. The roots of the Nordic alcohol monopolies are found in the late 19th century. At least in Norway, but I believe also in the other Nordic countries, alcohol harms were a major social issue. Alcohol problems were associated with poverty, unemployment, crime, and social disorder. And many women and children suffered due to drinking problems of the family breadwinner. The first alcohol monopolies were at the local level. These were first established in Sweden in the 1860s, called the Gothenburg system, and they were copied soon after in Norway. They applied to both on-premise and off-premise sales of spirits. The main purposes were to ensure tax collection and to take away private economic interests in the retail sales of spirits, and thereby better control and restrict the sales. In Norway, since 1894, local referendums were held on whether or not to allow spirit sales at all. The temperance movement was a strong actor in this matter and had interest also in women's right to vote. The outcome of the local referendums were often in favor of not allowing spirit sales and therefore led to a large decline in local monopolies around the turn of the century. In 1913, spirit sales were allowed only in 13 Norwegian cities. The Nordic state monopolies were established in the 20th century. First in Iceland and in Norway in 1922, in Finland a decade later, in Sweden in 1955, and in the Faroe Islands in 1992. The context and background for the establishment of the state monopolies were in part common for these Nordic countries. One common feature was that the drinking culture was characterized by an intoxication-oriented drinking pattern and preference for spirits. Another common feature was that the monopoly system was embedded in a comprehensive alcohol policy, including other regulatory measures, for instance in terms of high alcohol taxes. Moreover, the temperance movement stood strong in all these countries. On the other hand, the countries differ somewhat with regard to the alcohol policy situation preceding the establishment of the monopoly. In Iceland, Norway, Finland, and the Faroe Islands, the state monopolies were established more or less in the wake of prohibition. In Sweden, however, there was no prohibition at all, but instead a rationing system called the Brott system, which existed alongside the local monopolies until 1955. How are the Nordic alcohol monopolies important today? First of all, they serve as an instrument to control alcohol consumption and thereby harms from alcohol. As compared to privatized sales in grocery stores and the like, there are several features of the monopoly system that likely contribute to curb consumption and harms. In particular, it implies a substantial restriction on number of outlets. There is also a restriction on sales hours, enforcement of responsible sales in terms of complying with age limit, and ban on sales to intoxicated customers. And furthermore, it eliminates sales promotion. I will also argue that the monopolies serve alcohol research interests, and I'll come back to that. And finally, the importance of the monopolies is time dynamic, as they are faced with a challenging balance between keeping sufficient legitimacy on the one hand and keeping unpopular restrictive measures on the other. So, what can scientific evidence tell us about the importance of keeping the monopolies? First, are they effective instruments to control consumption? This figure is borrowed from the recent WHO publication on the Nordic alcohol monopolies, and it shows that the Nordic countries with state monopolies are among the European countries with the lowest per capita alcohol consumption. These are the countries with the red ring around them. But this doesn't mean that the monopoly system contributed to relatively low consumption, and we need to look at other ways to examine effects of having a state alcohol monopoly. The best evidence we have stems from studies of privatization, that is, lifting the state monopoly and leaving retail sales to private actors, typically grocery stores. This figure is borrowed from a systematic review by Robert Hahn and colleagues from 2012. They included 17 primary studies, most of them examining effects of privatization of wine sales or spirit sales in American states or Canadian provinces. And most of the events of privatization occurred in the 1970s or 1980s. Overall, these studies showed that privatization led to a substantial increase in consumption of the privatized beverage, a median increase of 44%, whereas privatization had little impact on consumption of non-privatized beverages. Thus, in sum, privatization led to an increase in total consumption. We will also look at evidence from two examples of changes to the monopoly system in the Nordic countries. The first example is from Finland, where, in short, beer sales were privatized in 1969. The number of outlets for beer sales increased enormously, as did beer sales, and total consumption of alcohol increased by 46% from one year to the next. The Finns also experienced a strong increase in alcohol-related morbidity and mortality and social problems. A particularly interesting finding in the evidence from Finland is that those who were heavy drinkers initially were more affected and increased their consumption to a larger extent than moderate drinkers. In other words, suggesting that maintenance of the monopoly protects also heavy drinkers. The other example is from Sweden, where sales of medium-strength beer were taken into monopoly outlets since 1977, a kind of re-monopolization. This led to a huge reduction in number of outlets where medium-strength beer was sold, from over 11,000 outlets to 300. It also implied that 18 to 19-year-olds were no longer allowed to purchase medium-strength beer. Ramstedt examined whether this policy change impacted on alcohol-related harms, and he found that it was associated with reductions in alcohol-related harms across all age groups. However, only some of the associations were statistically significant. As we have seen, the events of privatization or remonopolization date back quite a long time, and another approach to obtain evidence of likely effects of privatization or other changes to the monopoly system is modeling studies. These studies build on updated evidence of effects of various changes to relevant levers on alcohol consumption. These pertain to changes in outlet density, in sales hours, in prices and promotion and marketing on alcohol. Moreover, the modeling studies build on evidence of effects of consumption on various alcohol-related harms. Two modeling studies are reported for Sweden, the most recent in 2018. Two scenarios were examined. In the first scenario, monopoly outlets were replaced with private liquor stores. The prediction was that in this scenario, total consumption was expected to increase by 20%, and substantial increases in alcohol-related morbidity and mortality were also expected. In the second scenario, alcohol sales in monopoly outlets were replaced with sales in grocery stores. In this scenario, it was expected that total consumption would increase by 31%, and compared to the first scenario, even larger increases in alcohol-related morbidity and mortality were expected. Conducted in a similar way, there is also a modeling study from Finland. Again, two scenarios were examined. In the first scenario, a stricter monopoly system was depicted, similar to the current Swedish system, with all beverages above 3.5% only allowed in the monopoly outlets. In this scenario, it was expected that total consumption would decrease by 16%, and also that alcohol-related morbidity and mortality, crimes and economic costs would decrease to a substantial extent. In the second scenario, complete privatization was depicted, that is, all alcohol sales allowed in grocery stores. In this scenario, total alcohol consumption was expected to increase by 9%, and a substantial increase in alcohol-related harms were also expected. The importance of the alcohol monopolies in enforcement of the age limit is, at least as far as I know, not given much research attention. But there are at least some studies from Finland and Norway that provide evidence in this regard. These studies employed mystery shopper experiments and examined whether or not young people who appeared to be below legal purchase age were asked to present ID and denied purchase when they tried to purchase alcohol. These studies show that monopoly outlets fared better than private grocery stores in enforcing the age limit. The monopolies do also play a role in facilitating research. In particular, the only true experimental studies of alcohol policy changes were undertaken within a state monopoly and could only have been done in a monopoly system. Such experimental studies designs are the best and sometimes the only adequate design for evaluating effects of policy changes, in particular if the changes are small. Therefore, such facilitation of good quality research contributes to better evidence on effectiveness of alcohol policy measures. Thus, in my view, this is also an important role of the monopoly. Examples of experimental studies facilitated by Nordic alcohol monopolies include the Saturday openings of alcohol outlets in Norway and Sweden, the change from over-the-counter sales to self-service sales in Sweden and Norway, and the small extension of sales hours on Saturday in Norway. Moreover, the Swedish and Finnish monopolies also have or did have a role in alcohol research funding. The monopolies' chance to survive over time depends at least in part on their legitimacy under public opinion. This graph presents data from Norway and shows the proportion of people in favor of having wine in grocery stores and of having spirits in grocery stores, covering a period from early 1990s to present. It illustrates two things. First, that these opinions change over time, and second, that while a large proportion were in favor of wine in grocery stores, much fewer were in favor of having spirits in grocery stores. During this same period, several liberalizations occurred within the monopoly system in Norway, including extended sales hours, a threefold increase in number of outlets, and introduction of self-service. Thus, the decrease in favoring privatization of wine sales occurred much in parallel with increased availability of alcohol in monopoly outlets and customer-friendly policy. I should also add here that the interpretation of being in favor of wine in grocery stores is not entirely straightforward. It is quite possible that many would like to have wine in grocery stores and at the same time keep the monopoly stores as specialty shops for wine and spirits. It may also be noted that the Norwegian monopoly is highly popular and is ranked as the most or among the most popular companies in Norway over many years. As suggested by the previous, the legitimacy of the alcohol monopolies and hence their chance of survival seems to rest on strategies that are inherently extremely challenging. And I believe this applies to all the Nordic alcohol monopolies. These strategies need to keep the customers and the public opinion satisfied, yet such strategies are likely at risk of eroding effective levers and hence the monopoly's capacity for protecting people's health and safety. This is indeed a challenging balance between keeping sufficient legitimacy on the one hand and keeping unpopular restrictive measures on the other. And with this, I complete my presentation and thank you very much for your attention. Have a nice day and a good seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingeborg. I think these kinds of presentations are important as they teach us or help us understand how history has shaped where we are today. Right, it's time for our third presentation of today, and now we will take a look at what has been happening in Finland over the last years or months or sometimes even weeks. We've seen a lot of rapid changes, and Pia Mäkelä, research professor at the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare, is here to tell us about them. And Pia, you're here physically, so the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Now you can hear me. Good. Thanks. So hello and good morning. I'll go straight to the business because there's so much happening that the time will be short that way. So I will first start by showing the development in alcohol use and harms before any of these recent law changes happened. I will shortly talk about what happened in 2018 when the Alcohol Act was taken into use. And then I go to the main business of the day, Petteri Orpo's government program regarding alcohol and what has already taken place and where we are at the moment with the planned changes. So here you can see the development in per capita alcohol consumption, the green line, and alcohol attributable mortality, the blue line, until 2017. And you can see that it's a really wonderful situation. It's an historically good development in this series. And if you are wondering why this happened, at least one of the explanations is has to do with taxes. The red one is the alcohol tax cut in 2004, and then alcohol consumption and harms increased. But then after 2008, there were several alcohol tax increases, and that's at least one part in the explanation of why the development has been so good. So then, previously on Finnish alcohol policy, last season's finale included the 2018 change in Alcohol Act. And at that point, the upper limit for grocery store alcohol sales increased from 4.7 to 5.5%, and grocery store sales were allowed also for alcohol pops made from spirits. What followed? Research reports. So we made one report in 22 in THL, but at the end of last year, there were also two other reports. The two ones on the right are actually the same report, but published in two different sites, VAT and Labore, who participated. And then there is KKV, which is the Finnish Competition and Consumer Authority, and they have actually today also published a later report that I will mention later today. So what happened? This is a plot about the development, and you can see that there is nothing radical. There was not like a huge increase in alcohol consumption. But the longer-term favorable trend has continued after the law change, but perhaps at a slightly higher level. A time series model that we made with Tor Nordström indicated an about 3% increase, but the statistical significance of that depended on the model specification. But so it suggests that there may have been some slight increase in alcohol use. In the KKV report, they write that this is a ChatGPT translation, that the change in alcohol law may have slightly increased alcohol consumption in Finland. On the other hand, the results indicate that the tax increases made in connection with the reform may have reduced alcohol consumption and offset the consumption increasing effect of other legislative changes. And that's what we agree with, this conclusion. And it's also a good analysis of prices and changes between distribution channels, etc. Does it work? Yeah, thanks. So what happened to alcohol-related mortality after this 2018? Here you can see that per capita alcohol consumption, as I showed before, has continued to decrease, but alcohol-related mortality has not followed. So there has been some kind of change in this relation. Oops, what did I do now? there is some different interpretation about what happened to alcohol-related mortality, because in the KKV report they compare the Finnish case with some other countries, making a synthetic Finland, and you can see the composition of the synthetic Finland at the bottom of the graph. And so if you compare to those, there is not something very different happening in Finland, but then again, in those comparison countries, the relationship between alcohol-related mortality and alcohol use is very different, and it has changed differently. So it's a question, it raises doubt about whether this is a good set of countries to compare to. So perhaps the, I don't know, the conclusion about what happened to alcohol-related mortality is that there was a divergence between alcohol-related mortality and per capita alcohol consumption at the time of the law change. But whether this was causally due to the law change is very difficult to prove this way or that. So let's then go to the most interesting part, the new developments, the government program regarding alcohol. And the first thing that can be noted is that the chapter under which these suggested changes were had a title, Opening Up Markets and Increasing Competition. So that already tells you the frame under which it's not anything about public health, it's about increasing competition. And there were a lot of things under this title. So raising the 5.5% limit further to 8%, and that happened already in June last year. Allowing home deliveries for grocery stores and alcohol, allowing distance sales to Finland for all EU countries, removing restrictions on the marketing of alcohol, and this means especially spirits, by Finnish operators abroad, introducing further exceptions to the off-premise monopoly for small breweries and distilleries, and then 2 reports. One on the possibilities to allow sales of wines with an alcohol content of up to 15%, also elsewhere than in alcohol shops, and a report on whether alcohol policy regulation should be moved from the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health to the Ministry of Economic Affairs. Yet, there is also a sentence that the government will not make changes to alcohol's role and status with respect to public health, which is not actually very consistent with all these changes, but it's good that it's there. So actually today KKV published a report or a set of slides where they estimated the impact from the increasing the limit from 5.5 to 8%. And you can check those slides more carefully later on. But I summarize some of the results. With respect to price, there was little difference between alcohol and grocery stores when you compared same products. If you compare the cheapest products, whether or not they are the same, grocery stores had cheaper beverages, which is expected, and one of the mechanisms why we say that it makes a difference because cheap alcohol is the most dangerous type of alcohol. The decrease in trend in retail alcohol sales has continued, and according to the report, the sales of these products that were allowed in grocery stores didn't decrease much in alcohol, but the alcohol share of these sales shrunk from 100% to less than 20%. And the sales of those products increased about 5-fold, but that replaced sales of other beverages, partly milder beverages in grocery stores and partly ordinary wine and spirit sales in alcohol stores. So the ongoing development now with sequels is about home delivery. So the government proposal was submitted to Parliament in the last fall, and at the same time the notification procedure to European Commission was started. And already this home delivery issue, there are some worries regarding that, especially on age limit checks, on quick deliveries, and impacts on people with alcohol problems, and on the impacts on their families. Well, the Commission said that the law contradicts EU regulations. It's not possible to only allow the home deliveries for Finnish companies. So there have to be amendments to that proposal. And the distance sale regulations, which were going to be developed separately later, now have to be incorporated in the law. But whether it's for under 8% products, whether it's for wines or whether it's for spirits, that has not been published yet. In the Visnapu case that the European courts ruled about some years ago, according to that, the free movement of goods, which is Article 34 in the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, means that the sale of products sold in Finnish grocery stores should be allowed for other countries too, unless public health requires otherwise, which is Article 36 that says that you can have this exception. So the Supreme Court of Finland ruled that it was okay to require licenses and physical places of sale. As I understand it, I'm not an expert in law, but I've tried to study this. So when Finland allows home deliveries, this has to be changed. This will not hold any longer. But that means that the beverages sold outside of monopoly stores have to be open for distance sales. And if we think about the beverages that are within monopoly stores, the Finnish Court of Appeal in this same Visnapu case wrote that allowing distance sales to other EU countries would abolish the monopoly. This is what they wrote. I think this is also a ChatGPT translation. If the distance selling of products covered by alcohol retail monopoly to Finnish consumers were allowed for operators established in other member states, it would also have to be allowed for operators established in Finland. In practice, that would mean the abolition of the existing monopoly, which, according to the case law of the Court of Justice of the European Union, is not required by Article 37, which is the article allowing monopolies in EU. So taking all of this together, it would be very wise not to allow distance sales for wine and spirits. And if those are allowed, then the policymakers should realize that that very well may mean the end of for the monopoly. So after this, the new marketing regulations will be prepared, and after that, the further exceptions to the off-premise monopoly introduced for small breweries and distilleries will be prepared, in my understanding, and with the intention to also allow home delivery for those exceptions. And this, in my view, would pose a similar threat to the monopoly system as the distance sale regulations if they are open for wine and spirits. So if Finnish distilleries can sell alcohol and deliver it to homes, the same right needs to be extended to all of EU. So after that, not much would be left of the monopoly. And I think the good solution to that is that if Alko gets the home delivery option as planned in the bill proposed in the last fall, then the home delivery of the small distilleries and breweries could be handled through Alko. Then there is the report on the possibilities to allow sales of 15% wines, also elsewhere than in Alko shops. This is a report that Antti Neimala was invited to write. And the original deadline, I think, was mid-March, but it seems to have been moved about a month forward. But there is a pair to this report, the KKV report, which includes an ex-ante assessment of allowing wine sales in grocery stores. And this was published today. So a key question in both reports is that, is the monopoly still justified and tenable economically, legally, or public health-wise if it continues to be shrunk? In the KKV report, I think they have concentrated on the economic side, and the legal side will at least be covered by Antti Neimala. We don't know what all other things that the report will cover. And I would personally add that a good question is also that, is there a point for a state monopoly if it is forced to compete on selling alcohol on the market? Because that was the original idea in making the monopolies. In KKV's report, it's a thorough analysis based on sales point specific sales data from Alko and the grocery stores, which the KKV has the right to require, and it's wonderful that they have made such an analysis. Key result is that if the proportion of wine sales shifting from grocery stores would be anywhere near that seen for milder wines and stronger beer, so far it would be very hard to maintain a chain of specialty stores that would cover the whole country. Not necessarily impossible, but very hard. So they write, again translated, when deciding on the liberalization of wine sales, it is essential to carefully consider Alko's future position and operating model. The liberalization of wine sales will inevitably be reflected on the sale of spirits and their regulation. They also try to estimate the impact on per capita alcohol consumption, which is quite hard and has a lot of uncertainties. Their result was that it would increase it by from 2 to 5%. But of course, if that would break the whole system, then the result would be something different. That was not taken into account in the calculations. And then the last piece in the government program is the report to be written on whether alcohol policy regulation should be moved from the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health to the Ministry of Economic Affairs. I think I heard that the person to write this report has been named, but that's all we have heard about this so far. So we will get sequels and hear more about it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pia. That was a lot. It's a lot going on, but it's good that we stay informed. So last but not least, as you tend to say, we'll hear from the alcohol monopolies. And we have Fredrik Woods, a public and regulatory affairs manager at Systembolaget, who will provide a little more insight into the Nordic monopolies and how they sort of function in this fast changing environment. And Fredrik, you're here in person too,
Yes.
so welcome. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. Thank you for having me and for asking us to be part of this. As we've heard, a lot of things is going on, and it's fast. Changes are happening fast in the Nordics. And just to refer back to what has been said, I'll try to sort of come at almost the same kind of issues and topics, but from another perspective, trying to give the retail monopoly perspective on both what Maria told from the monopoly report, and Ingeborg showing the sort of historical context, and trying to add the Swedish perspective to the Finnish situation. So is the retail monopolies at a crossroads? That's well, looking at Finland, that might be seem almost like yes, we're at some kind of crossroads. But just to begin with, the Nordic approach, and this isn't new, and we've heard earlier today about the similarities and the reason why the monopolies were established. So my main sort of point here is rather to point to what stands out in the Nordics is not only sort of regulating alcohol in different ways by limiting the point of sale opening hours, but that we sort of act and sell without having the maximizing profit interest. So whenever the stores, and this is probably what I can provide, the perspective that I can provide here, is how the stores function, how the staff work, because that is the front line of alcohol policy in the Nordics. How the staff in all of our stores work every day in meeting customers and balancing. And I'll come back to that. I'm sorry for the Swedish here. I couldn't find the English version, but many of you understand, but it says different for a reason. And I like this picture because this shows that there's someone waiting for the store to open in the background. And for those that want to go and buy alcohol, we're there for them. And we should be open and provide the products with a good service for those who want to buy them. But we're also there for those who are affected by the consumption in a sort of negative way. This child that's sort of turning his face towards the camera shows that we're there for them too, for those who don't want us to, well, don't want their parents or their relatives or anyone in their sort of closeness to sort of drink too much. And we have plenty of those examples from our stores every day, where staff meet. Our staff around Sweden meet the sort of alcohol addicts every day. Those are the only ones meeting all of them every day, while at the same time balancing that with those who want to come in and buy the best wine for their dinner the same night or for the weekend. So balancing that in a sort of way that sort of take into consider our public health goal and aim, while also providing with good and information and advice. And this isn't sort of new for people here, but still, these are some of the things that are different from the other retailers. Maria and the WHO report shows this quite well, I think. But still, again, the balancing act of taking into consideration public health and also providing the information that the customers expect from us, being the only seller of alcohol in the country. And the picture shows the word I have for it is the second thoughts trolley. It's if you come up to the cashier and you're about to pay for your alcohol, this is sort of to remind you or to nudge you into thinking, do I really need all of this today? Do I really need all of this for my weekend plans? Or should I leave something here in the store? Instead of pushing for buying more than what you really need. And I know I asked one of the members of in the management board, is this used at all? And we were on the meeting when we asked, is this used? And I had to follow up afterwards as well to see, is it used or is it just for show? But it is used, not in a big way, but still it's there, and people put drinks in it. So, yeah. And being different, and this is sort of what Ingeborg also touched upon in her presentation, that being different in this way, in sort of restricting several freedoms, the freedom of market and freedom of choice, requires high legitimacy and public support. It's crucial. At Systembolaget, part of that is what we call our customer pledge, that everyone should be feel welcome when they come into the stores, to be greeted by a member of staff, and so being known in the store, and to feel that I'm welcome here. I'm not sort of blamed or ashamed for being here, but welcome. We have a promise to always be able to tell and to let customers discover something new that we have, a new kind of product, and a more sustainable, friendly product, or something new in any way. And the third sort of pledge that we have is that the customer should always trust us to sell responsible. And this is what we work for every day. This is what the staff works for every day in all of our stores. And I think that the best sort of receipt on how well it works is this is from Sweden, and the trust, again, apologize for the Swedish, but the trust that the Swedes have in the companies all over Sweden. And a survey asking people all around, what kind of trust do you have in the companies? And we have IKEA, Volvo, ICA, the big grocery stores, Postal, SAS, so on. And Systembolaget keeps on sort of being on top, and we've been on top for many years. And this isn't our own survey. This is a third-party survey. And this is also a picture showing that how do you perceive these actors as being responsible, as a responsible sort of actor in society, taking considerations into sustainability and so on, health, and again, Systembolaget again scores high. Just to show that the staff do a tremendous job. I can't really stand here and take any sort of gratitude for this. It's thanks to the people in our stores that manage the balancing act. Yes, and this is just to show taking all actors into consideration, not only the companies, but the governmental officials, politics, and everything into account. Only the police and universities score higher. And going back to also what's been touched upon today is the ability for the retail monopolies to adapt to challenges. The monopolies were established to sort of address and to certain problems and challenges in society, and alcohol consumption, even if it's enjoyed by many, it still causes harm, and that problem is still the same. That hasn't changed, even though consumption has gone down. And these different things that challenge or put a challenge towards the monopolies are all things that the monopolies have managed throughout over time. And the next chart is also found in the Monopoly report, but in English, but it only covers up to year 2022. So I wanted to add the most recent sort of numbers. So again, for Swedish, but it's the same, shows the same, that changes over the years have also, I could put in the same kind of events that Ingeborg did for Vinmonopolet, showing that yes, things affect the trust for Systembolaget, but when we also changed and adapted, keeping to our core mission and our public health sort of goal, still managed to gain the trust from the public. And these numbers also show that the trust have sort of increased and are very stable and been stable for many years, while the question asked, would you allow sales of beers, stronger beers, wines and spirits in stores, have dropped and are quite stable, but it hasn't really shown in any other direction. So being able to adapt is, I think, one of the fine things and the strengths with the monopolies, and to sort of reflect on times ahead. I think that the monopolies have sort of a built-in mechanism of responding and correspond to changes around them as well. And Ingeborg had this stones balancing, and I thought, well, just to maybe emphasize the balancing, because I'll keep coming back to that. Yes, we eliminate the profit-driven motives while providing excellent customer service. That's a balancing act. We balance actually the regulatory burden that comes with the alcohol product and market interests with the public health aim. Is also a balancing act. And I would say that also, as that has been pointed out by both Maria and Ingeborg, is that the different policy tools interact together. Well, you can't isolate the monopolies and take it out from the equation. You have to see it in relation to other tools, and the excise taxes, I think, on alcohol, together with the pricing mechanism that the monopolies have, show that the excise have a sort of an effect on the pricing and on consumer habits. And I would also want to add other benefits that follow from this, is that we have stores all over Sweden and all over our countries with a product range also available throughout the country. We can focus on achieving sustainable supply chains, and this is one topic that we also is also beneficial, not only doing it by ourselves, but together with others. So we have great cooperation and exchange of thoughts and ideas together with the other Nordic monopolies, and this is sort of one of the strengths that we have as an actor, but also doing it together with others. And also another benefit of not having it so spread all over in all kind of stores is that those that don't want to face and look at the alcohol products in the grocery stores, for example, they don't have to if they don't want to. So just to sum up, we're public health tools with a profit maximizing purpose. We all operate really opposed to normal retail stores. And while alcohol is enjoyed by many, it still causes harm, both on individual and societal level. And the medical and social effects need to be dealt with, even in the future. And how that would be is finally and solely up to the parliaments and to the elected. But it still needs to be dealt with. And I would say that the monopolies function well in managing the balancing act, again, between sometimes seemingly opposing aims. And I'll end with a question. Like, is it possible to have an alcohol policy that continue to mitigate the harmful effects as its core, while having a clear appeal for customers and anchored with decision makers, as it has support from key players, the customers, suppliers, and research? And with that sort of rhetorical question, I'll end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fredrik. Now we will have a very short break. We will rearrange the furniture for our roundtable discussion, so don't go anywhere. We'll be back very soon. Time to move on to the second part of the day. It's time to have to talk about what we just learned and what we just heard. And I will briefly introduce my panelists here. Well, Fredrik, you moved straight from the presenter's booth to our discussions, so welcome. But I am also happy to introduce Maria Renström. Welcome. You have a pretty solid background and experience working with alcohol issues from many different perspectives. Right now, you work as a consultant for WHO, and you were one of the main authors for the report that Maria Neufeld talked about. And also, you are a secretary to a committee looking into enhanced follow-up and evaluation of public health policy in Sweden. Then we have Lauri Beekmann. Welcome. You join us from Estonia, all the way, where you serve as an executive director of NordAN. NordAN, the Nordic Alcohol and Drug Policy Network, is a network with about 60 NGOs across the Nordic and the Baltic countries. And you have a background in the Estonian temperance movement. And then we have Thomas Karlsson. Welcome. You work as the head of Promotional and Preventive unit at the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare, and you have dedicated practically your whole career to alcohol research, with a particular interest in the Nordics. So happy to have you all here. And as I said, based on what we just heard, we're going to dig deeper into these conversations. We still have the Q&A function open on the platform. And we have had not a lot of questions thus far, but we have had some comments, and that's all right too. So just keep up, and if there's anything from the chat, Anna will let us know. I was thinking we could start with some yes or no questions, just to get us all going. So it's a question for all of you. We heard a lot of Finland. We know that Sweden are debating or will perhaps introduce farm sales later on this summer. We know that the Icelandic alcohol monopoly struggles with online sales. So there's a lot going on. And given all this, yes or no, is it still fair to even talk about a Nordic model for alcohol policies? You can say yes, no, and then one sentence, why or why not. Lauri, if you want to go first.
Well, definitely yes. Of course, it's an example to the rest of the world, and as Maria was saying, this is where the best buys are being put in practice. So if that would be removed, the whole theoretical base kind of is in danger as well. So I definitely say yes.
Team yes. What is Fredrik's?
I'll join Lauri on the team yes. Just looking back on what I shared and what we see together with the Nordic monopolies, how we function and the similarities, I would definitely say that there's still a Nordic model.
I have to say something else then. I will say both yes and no, actually. I think it would be good to get away from talking about just a Nordic model, to talk about a cost-effective, if you look at the impact of the policy. That's my...
I liked actually Maria's point. That was good.
You changed your mind.
Well, I was about to say no, but just for the sake of conversation. But of course, yes is my answer. And if I would have been asked this question, let's say 20 years or 25 years ago, I would have probably said that we still have a system, but it's slowly fading away. But I'm more of an optimist today, so I'm going to say yes, and definitely we're going to have it also in the future.
Thank you. We'll stay on the subject of monopolies, and here I'm thinking you can all answer, but I start with you, Maria.
Because I said something more.
No, but just as one of the authors to
Yes.
this WHO report, and with your public health background, and this might be a bit provocative, but sometimes you hear like, why do we need the monopolies here in the Nordics? Because everyone else is doing just fine without. And why do we need this nanny state system? So why do you believe that this is the case, if everyone else is doing just fine without?
Well, first of all, I would say that everyone else is not doing fine without. And I think to focus on the really key positive things with monopolies, I will start with the ID controls, the age control, protecting of young people. I think that is absolutely the thing that could motivate to have monopolies everywhere, a retail monopoly. And then I think that we have this long tradition, as Ingeborg was saying. We don't know what would happen if we would have it liberalized with profit, first of all, because then I think it will increase the sort of things that we know increase the attractiveness of a product. That would be the same for alcohol. If they could market it in a way that we really would support more consumption, and especially in the socioeconomic lower groups. I think that we haven't focused enough on looking at who is suffering the most if we don't have restrictions on availability. That are the weakest. They are at the risk. So that's why I, as a social worker background, is very much in favor of keeping these restrictions and non-profit, I would say, and the balance, good balance.
Maybe Thomas, I'll let you finish, or I'll let you keep talking, but in the governmental program, there's a sentence in Finland that we want to become more European by all these liberal steps. So what's your thought on becoming European and still maintaining these Nordic values?
Yeah, I really hate that notion about becoming European. It's like people haven't looked up in the atlas or looked at the map and seen that we are actually a part of Europe. And there are different parts of Europe, and the people drink differently in different parts of Europe. It hasn't necessarily anything to do with the climate. Of course, with the wine drinking, they drink it where it is, have traditionally been drinking it, where it has been produced. But I think that we are, I just want to continue what Maria also said, that we are a good showcase of the best buys in alcohol policy in the Nordic countries. The monopolies with all the systems and the age control, and I think that we are also seen from other parts of Europe as being the one. That's why I think that Maria Neufeld also put it quite well when she said that why are we changing? Why have we been talking about to change our policies? But I think that the rest of the Europe has a lot to learn from us, and we do not necessarily also always have to learn from other countries, especially not what comes to drinking habits when you look at the adverse side of drinking.
Can I add just one thing to complement? The convergence, if we look at public health policy, including alcohol policy in the EU, to just continue use, because actually we are getting closer when we look at public health policy comprehensiveness, including alcohol policy as a part of it. So we are sort of more the same, then we are different today.
You mentioned, and Finland is rated as the most nanny state country in Europe. There is a UK-based rating being done. We responded in a way by gathering all possible other kinds of ratings, and it clearly showed that all Nordic countries, Finland included, is doing best, whether we start from the happiness index to almost every positive index. The Nordic countries are doing something very good. So if you want to call it a nanny state approach, people like it and people support it, right? Also the monopoly systems. What troubles me from being an outsider in looking at the Nordic system, you have a long-standing, very stable societies. What we are witnessing, and what I would say, what is the main change that is taking place, is a political ideology change, right? This is what is not only in the Nordic countries, obviously, but in Finland, experts, media is reporting that at the moment the government is the most right-wing government since the World War II. So something has been changed, and in the past it seems to me that regardless of the government, there are certain things that you have agreed on, the welfare state principles. So this is one part of the change now taking place, and obviously people are supporting monopolies, but politicians know, and we know probably as well, this is not the matter based on what people will make their choice on election day. And politicians know that, unfortunately, very well as well. So this is kind of a political change that we are witnessing, a democracy at its best. And I'm not saying anything against right-wing policies as such, but alcohol policy is something that traditionally is more left-leaning, higher state involvement, regulation, and so on. So what I think what we are witnessing in that sense in looking at the Nordic countries is, and my question is whether we are seeing a more larger change in looking at the welfare state as such as well.
So as an indication. Did we have a question from the audience?
Yes, there are more appreciative comments on the WH reports coming in, but also a few questions. And one, I think, is for Fredrik. And it's on, it says Systembolaget, but I guess you could say the alcohol monopolies. How do they balance the demand for making a profit and not selling more alcohol?
In practice, I think the whole setup in the stores shows that we want the customers to come into the stores and go and buy what they came for, and not buying more than what they. Is it? All right. Hello. One is the setup in the stores. Is it? It's on. Sorry. Yeah. How where we put the cashiers and the walk through of the stores, so that you get into the stores and you buy what you came for, and not sort of wandering around and adding on to the basket is one way of doing it. And I have a long list of different things that we do different from ordinary sort of retail stores, and we try to see what drives sale, what drives additional sales. Let's do the opposite of that. and that goes for everything. Not having music in the stores, how the staff meets the customers when they come in, how they what kind of products they recommend, how they sort of try to see and find and approach each customer in an individual way, not having things by the cashiers to add to the basket, at least not in alcohol-related alcohol products, not having alcohol products on the sides of the shelves, because we know that adds sales. So a lot of things. I don't know if that's an answer to the question.
Can I take another question?
You can.
I think this one might be for Lauri, but you can all chip in. And the question is if we think that the alcohol industry is trying to undermine the Nordic alcohol policy. And if we do think so, do we know their strategies?
We definitely probably know their strategies. This is what we have seen all over the world, and at the moment, just to continue from my previous intervention, they are aligned with the parties in power at the moment. So it looks like that while they are selling also the European model. Maybe not, they are not talking about the harms that Europeans are facing, but the regulation, the freedom, right? The ability to buy from everywhere. This is aligned at the moment with this right-wing political situation and alcohol industry interest. So definitely, I think what the industry is after is, and the keywords that they use, what sounds nice probably for many people among the electorates is exactly the freedom, the ability to buy alcohol everywhere. And Finns know very well Estonia. They come to Estonia to buy alcohol as well. Again, yesterday evening when I arrived, I saw quite many Finns dragging huge amounts of alcohol to the shore. So this is probably what they witness. If you noticed from the graph shown by Maria, showing that Estonia is in the top when it comes to alcohol-related harm. This is Finns visiting Tallinn maybe don't see that well, but the data is clear, of course.
I can add something just to make it a little bit more complex very quickly. There are parts, at least how they look at the Systembolaget, I can have only facts on that. There are some parts actually also from the alcohol producers that see that they are gaining from having a retail monopoly with the sort of access to everywhere, and that they could actually also lose something of losing the monopoly. So I think we should also focus a bit on the complex situation. It's not that straightforward, actually.
Yeah, and I want to say the same thing, that it's a complex issue. I can't say that this is the reasoning behind all the industry, that everyone wants to dismantle the monopolies, because as you pointed out, Maria, they gain access to the whole of Sweden, and instead of reaching out to every kind of municipality in all the stores they go through the one sole actor, and that helps. And as I said in my presentation, we balance the regulatory burden in a way that without the monopoly, then what kind of increases would you have to put in place to level up the change?
Right. We'll stick to the monopolies still. And I'm interested, based on your experiences, what do you think would be the most significant consequences if we were to expand retail sales networks of alcohol? We would probably see lots of different effects, but I'm thinking, healthcare, crime rates, state budget. Am I mentioning all your points here? No. What would you imagine happening first? What were the most significant changes?
Well, I think that the most significant changes would be to really think hard before you make the decision. Because, I mean, as we've seen the situation in Finland, Pia talked about the sequels. We have had first a big reform in, not so big, but still a reform in 2018. Then we had the second reform last year when we liberalized the alcohol policy, and the stronger alcoholic beverages came to grocery stores, and this is then again followed by another small step towards liberalization, and this kind of a inch by inch or a bit by bit thing is blurring the big picture from the inevitable end goal, or which is, I mean, the abolition of the alcohol monopoly. And my point here is that, of course, if you small changes in the availability, they have a small effect on the consumption, and that's what we've seen in Finland. The effects haven't been huge, and they have been counteracted by tax increases, and we have had several of them, as Pia showed in her graphs. And the overall alcohol consumption has been going down for over 15 years. But I also I think that if you try really, really hard in liberalizing the alcohol policy and making alcohol more available, you can really increase also alcohol consumption and related harm. I think for the time being we are probably somewhere quite low in the long waves of alcohol consumption. Robin Room has written one or several articles about the long waves of alcohol consumption. I think that we have seen a decrease in alcohol consumption in the trend going on for quite a while in Finland. We can't count on this happening for the future also. It's really hard to predict the future. If I could, I wouldn't sit here now. So, so actually, my point is that these changes we do in our, I still call it the Nordic monopoly system or the Nordic alcohol policy system. These only function one way. When we have liberalized the systems, there in a EU environment, there's no going back. So we really should think carefully about the decisions we do, because when we actually done them, we can't take them back. So that's I think the most important realization which the decision makers should have.
Before it's too late.
Before it's too late.
Consequences.
Yeah, I think that we should not focus only on the per capita consumption levels in a country. I think the inequalities, what I'm afraid of, is that liberalization will contribute to greater inequalities when we look at both health and other harms. So we need to increase our knowledge about how this would impact on different groups, not only on the population level. Even if I'm a public health person, I think that we need to dig further down. Another thing that we haven't focused on is actually the increased costs for the society, because you have to control mechanism. We know how much work for the state and the local authorities to control the age limits, for example. When it's in the monopoly, it's just absolutely excellent. But if you want to keep that up, when it goes into the grocery stores, of course, as for tobacco, you need to increase the state control or whatever. So I just want to mention those things, that we need to have a broader knowledge of the impact, not only focus on this sort of general.
Maybe I would zoom in on the youth aspect, and that was mentioned as well, that the monopoly system protects the youth. Again, when comparing with the European countries, the Baltic countries, for example, where the youth drinking for a long time has been a big issue. And for the Nordics, maybe you, again, practically you don't quite realize the situation, the availability and the problem of enforcement actually in the situations where you have so many more physical selling points and in large supermarkets, actual cashier points where a person under stress, long lines, you have to check not the age only, but also intoxicated people and so on. So the enforcement side is that much more difficult. And on top of that, of course, the retail sale has the profit motivations, right? So there might be an issue also whether I want to say no to a person who looks like an maybe intoxicated or so on. So you would open the door to something that causes issues quite fast, but I agree, of course, that the results will be a long term, clearly.
Good. Let's say a couple of words about research, and here I'm looking at you first, again, because as a researcher with decade of experiences in Nordic countries or Nordic contexts, do you see that there are still any large gaps regarding research? Is still anything we should address more closely?
As you know, all presentations and even articles should end with there is still need for more research with the sentence. So of course there is still
always need more research.
You always need more research. Yeah.
The researcher would always say that.
I would, and yeah. But I think that we are pretty well covered. I would actually urge and wish for more research between the Nordic countries and perhaps joint research projects. I think, as I said, that there is a solid evidence base, but I really would like to see at least, and Denmark, of course, welcome, but at least from the monopoly countries that we could do something together, because I would say that the countries, you know, the expression same but different. I would say that we are different, but fundamentally quite same in the basis of the monopoly and the best buys, and on the things that our policies are based on. So I really would emphasize more joint research projects on strengthening the base.
Yeah, and I mean, we have the WHO, we have the EU, we have joint actions, but yeah, the Nordic contexts, what can it bring?
I was going to say that I think that we would need to know more about the effects of what we do as a monopoly, and that's why I mean, it's really positive, and we welcome this.
He knows that I've asked a lot of questions.
And the inquiry that has that as its mission right now, part of its mission to evaluate how effective the Systembolaget is. But that is something. I mean, that we would want to know more about the effects of the things we do as a company. How does this affect into practice? We know a lot, and there's a lot of research, and there's a lot of things going on. But I think here, at least when I speak with my colleagues, they see that here's something that we would need to know more about.
I can add, as I can add something, because this is actually what I'm doing now in this committee. And it's obvious we don't know cost related to violence. We don't have enough data. We don't know cost outside the health sector that much. So when we are now trying to sort of measure and to report back to the government on also the effect on other sectors, and not only on the people, but also on the cost for the local authorities and so on, and then it's obvious that we don't have enough reliable data from other sectors. So our problem is now, we are trying to say, while it's outside restaurants, for example, there's some few research on it, but we don't have any sort of solid ongoing. So just to mention a couple of things where I can see we have to think a little bit different when we consider what's most necessary now to know more about to safeguard the public health-based alcohol policy. We maybe research a little bit too much on some things that maybe is not most important today, to be a little bit controversial.
As a non-researcher, I would point out to something that I predict. As a non-researcher, right? I was saying I predict something that us as advocates as well need in the future is to understand how to get across to someone who is not hearing the evidence-based argument, but an ideological point of view. I think when we think of America and different kind of discussions that they are having, what kind of a study do you need to convince someone who has a position on abortion, against abortion? What kind of an evidence can you provide so that he or she would make a change? He or she has an ideological point. And I think here with political parties, again, as advocates, we need to learn the language of how to explain how the best buys should not be in the opposition when the right-wing kind of mentality and thinking is in the coalition. How to explain and how to sell in a way the political views of these evidence-based traditions. So that I would like to see from the science as well. We see papers on how to get across the message of alcohol and cancer, for example, the labeling issues and so on, how to be effective in raising awareness on different issues and so on.
I think we have a question from the Q&A.
We have many questions, but first of all, we have a comment from Maria Neufeld, the first presenter here today. She wants to add to this discussion that she thinks there's a need for more research and policy dialogue between the Nordic monopolies and other European countries, and that there's big interest from other countries on the Nordic monopolies, more than we realize in the Nordics, she has found out, working with this report. And we can see that also from the chat. It comes in a lot of questions from countries around the world, actually. And we have two questions that I thought that I might put to the panel. And one is on marketing and marketing restrictions, where the participant lifts Norway as a good example of having very strong marketing laws. And couldn't the other Nordic countries be influenced and inspired by that, and also the rest of Europe? But why not the Nordic countries, if we take that one first?
Shall I say something? Okay. Well, actually, we had before in the other countries as well. So it's more like we have lost a bit of our restrictions on marketing than we had the same thoughts like the person requesting about a good, effective marketing regulation. But we lost in the court due to EU rules, for example, and so on. So, yeah, we know we should, but we fail
Just to point out that Lithuania is now also in this group, being the only European Union member state that has a total ban on alcohol advertising. And I think the European alcohol policy group and member states for a long time lived in an understanding that under the EU rules you cannot ban alcohol advertising. The free market rules kind of, and I think Swedish example was sometimes brought out as such, and then Lithuania just went and did it, and it's working. So the example now, practical example is there, and definitely, I mean, other countries should learn more about it, and Nordic countries, clearly your level is compared to other European countries is higher anyway, also regulating alcohol advertising. So I think still, also when it comes to marketing, countries can look at Nordic countries as well.
But maybe we can broaden the geographical scope a bit and include the Baltics as well, because there are many exciting things happening in Baltic alcohol control. But no. Time is running so fast when you're having fun. And I think it's time to sort of close this discussion soon. We have 2 minutes. Very difficult perhaps to squeeze this into one sentence, but in times of turmoil, how could we stick to what we know works best? Do you have like one happy take-home message to provide some hope before we close this discussion?
I can say one thing.
Please.
I usually say it. You have to always be aware where the public, the population is, where the support, what they care about, and focus on that when you want to gain them. For example, protecting young people is such a message, to make it very easy answer. But I think if you are aware where you actually can reach out and get the support from the public, the people in your country, in Europe, then I think it will be difficult.
One phrase that came to my head is sort of paraphrasing a historical quotation, keep calm and carry on. The things we do in our stores and how we sell, it has a positive sort of effect in how we meeting our customers and the response that we get to keep on doing what we do. Of course, balancing different aspects, as you pointed out. That would be my.
I think that's actually a perfect place to end this discussion. Keep calm and carry on. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. This entire event will be available for viewing on the Nordic Welfare's YouTube channel within a few weeks. So thank you all and have a nice day.